What is an RTD? First off, RTD stands for Roundtable Discussion. It's a videotape panel discussion hosted by doremicom, co-hosted by Solid Smurf, where we take a wargaming topic, force the panel to analyze wargaming trends, force the panel to answer at least 6 questions, then ask them to make an outlandish prediction about the future. Oh, and I forgot to mention the most difficult thing. Take away the round table, force them to use video chat software that rarely works, and be entertaining. The Roundtable Discussion. Bringing the what to wargaming.
Hey guys, welcome back to doremicom channel. We're here with RTD Season 4, Episode 6, entitled The Model. In a previous RTD, we discussed all the little extras that go into the wargaming hobby, but no one ever started playing a hobbyist wargame because they thought the movement template was really super cool. It was always the miniatures, whether they're cast in metals, plastic, resin. These tiny replicas of fantasy, modern, or futuristic warfare delight the hobbyist and gamer alike. In this episode of the RTD, we will talk about the miniatures, how they influence the game, and how they can cost so much and yet bring such a huge smile on our faces. With me today is my cast, starting off with the man from China, Jeremiah Driggs.
Way, ni hao.
And Solid Smurf, the co-host.
Howdy, howdy.
The man who is awesome and always fills in as backup whenever possible, John from Wargame Painting.
What's up, guys?
All right, here we go with question, and actually this, even though this is the first question, this is actually question 0. We specify this in the RTD as a question that we will not have a after discussion or, further discussion about. So question 0, just to set the stage, tell us about your first experience at looking at a hobbyist wargaming model. What was the game? What was your reaction? And for this, we're going to start with Jeremiah Drake.
My first interaction with the game piece was 40K, of course. It's probably back in 1994. And it was the simple plastic miniature where you push in the gun into the chest piece, and really simple, but I was amazed by it. I thought they were so cool. It made me go out immediately, buy the little box startup set with 5 little paints, and I butchered that model. But I didn't know what it was for. I didn't know how it moved. I just thought it was so cool. I thought it was awesome, and that's my first experience.
All right, Solid Smurf, you're up next.
40K.
Tell me about your first model experience.
Coming from the dawn of war, I was Googling cheat codes, and it brought up little pictures of the little dudes. I'm like, oh, they actually exist. I can hold them in my hand. And then I learned there's a game to go along with it, and I was hooked. And that's that.
All right, John from Wargame Painting.
My first experience was actually like a Civil War reenactment tabletop game. I don't know what the game was called, but I saw a bunch of old school cannons, and they had the cotton ball smoke coming out of them. I'm like, that is awesome. I want to do something like that.
Awesome. And for me, the first model experience that I had was with the Rao Partha miniatures for the Dungeons & Dragons way back in the blue box dragon basic set of Dungeons & Dragons. The models were so impressive to me that at the time I was in Little League Soccer, and my parents decided that seeing how much I enjoyed actually collecting those things, they actually started saying, if you scored so many multiples of 10 goals, we'll consider giving you a model for each one. And in Little League Soccer, first 3 games, only 6 goals. For the last 7 games, I had over 65 goals. And with that, we're going to go ahead and continue with question 1, which is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being no influence, 10 being the only deciding factor, regardless of the game, how much does the size of a model determine your interest in purchasing said model? And for this, we're going to start with Solid Smurf.
Going with an 8, because I love extremes. I hate the idea of a man-sized model. I like little guys like pygmy trolls. I like the big guys like, tags and colossals and things like that. So if it's one extreme or the other, I want it.
Nice. John, what's your thoughts?
I think that about a 7, I'm going to say. I think the size of the model definitely would encourage me to buy it, but not necessarily the only factor when I come to purchasing stuff.
Okay. Jeremiah, what's your thoughts?
For me, I think the size of the model doesn't mean anything. I would give this a 0. I mean, say you have an army, you have an army, right, that you plan on buying, and you're going to need things, and size is sometimes detrimental in gameplay. So I don't think for me it's not the size of the model. A lot of the times for me it's like the details and how. That sounds funny, doesn't it? It's not the size of the model, it's how it works.
Yeah, exactly. Gotcha. Fantastic. That's fantastic. Giving us a 0 when the scale is 1 to 10. All right. For me, I'm actually going to go.
One.
I'm going to go a little bit farther away from him by saying actually the size of the model for me is a 9. I think it is, and you got to fit that right size. If it's too small, it's for me, I know that I'm not going to get enough detail for my old eyes to be able to check out the miniature as we're playing the game, so why not just use tokens? If it's too large, I don't know that I'm going to want to spend the time assembling it, so it's right sizing it for the game, but definitely with a preference to the larger. And for this, we're going to have continued discussion, but not really just continued discussion. We're going to open up the question to say, what about the average wargamer, not just our personal opinions? And so let's have continued discussion on that factor alone.
Well, I mean, I know something you talk about a lot is transportation. And I think that's a limiting factor for a lot of players is, they don't want to get a Colossal and they don't want to have to get a Titan and have to transport it. On the same note, they don't want to lose the little guys either. So the man-sized model is perfect for them. They love it. I know you love the man-sized model, or the one bigger too. So I'm talking War Machine terms. So a medium or a large base as opposed to a Colossal or a Battle Engine base. For 40K players, that'd be a 25 to 60 mil. So, that those are easy to transport. It's what the majority of the foam is made for. Whereas you get these bigger guys or these tiny guys, and you don't want to have a piece of foam that's that thick and a guy that's only that big to fit in it. He's going to rattle around. So I think transportation is a big hindrance for people.
So, John, what's your thoughts on this? Again, changing it from your personal to like the average wargamer.
Yeah. I'm going to say that Smurf pretty much hit that one right on the head for once. I'm not going to argue with him. I'm going to think that most people are going to be inclined to stick with the easiest to transport size stuff, or like the very run-of-the-mill stuff, because the bigger that you have to get, the harder it becomes to carry. I know that I've got the Forge World Bloodthirster, and I used to bring it with me to every game that I played. And when I'm driving 15, 20 minutes, the thing's sitting in my lap the entire drive because I don't want to hurt it. But that's becoming a hassle. So, I mean, I'd rather just carry around my briefcase full of guys and not have to deal with that. And I'm sure that I'm not the only one who thinks that.
Did you ever get
so from a playing perspective, I'd say it's a 10. But from a collecting perspective, it's lower.
Well, this is the question is the size determining whether or not you purchase it. So from an average wargamer, would you say what?
Right, and for an average wargamer, I'd say 7, because I think that wargamer includes the hobbyist aspect of that. So people are inclined to buy bigger stuff if they're not going to necessarily play with it just because they want to have it.
Right. And Smurf, again, just to recap, when we switch it from your perspective to the average wargamer, what does your number change to, or did it stay at 8?
I think it pretty much stays at 8, but for a different reason. Mine is I pick size based on the extremes. They pick size based on the averages.
Gotcha. And Jeremiah, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, mine's, for the average gamer, I'm still going to stick pretty low. I think John said something, the bigger stuff that you, most of the time you buy, like say a Titan, normally people don't buy those because they're going to play, every game with those. You don't take those to every game, You buy them because they're really cool and that you want to have some sort of like really cool showpiece just to say, hey, I've got this. I don't think it's so much that because it's big, like I'm trying to think of a model to say that, you buy transports because you need them. It's not about the size of the transport, It's not about the size of the Rhino. It's not about the size of say the men that you have. You buy things because you need those specifically for a certain army type or a certain army list. And I just don't see size as being a determining factor in purchasing something.
Okay, so in your perspective, you think the average wargamer really doesn't care, and it's a 1. I guess if I was going to follow up with this, again, I would kind of agree with transportation issues, but even more so than the transportation issues, I think size really does play a factor, again, favoring the larger size models, even though it may or may not incorporate whether or not a person wants to buy the miniature for a particular game, especially with transportation issues. But from the standpoint of it differentiating itself and being large enough to catch people's eyes when they go into a general hobbyist wargaming store, I think in that case it's not a matter of of wanting to go average, but rather just huge, just so that it people can actually pick it out of what might be plethora of games based on your particular hobby store. Question number 2, using the same 10-point scale, how much does the rule system that accompanies the model range influence a wargamer's interest in purchasing the model? Okay, so regardless of how cool the model looks, the size, whatever, for a wargamer, not necessarily a hobbyist, for a wargamer, how much does the rule system that accompanies the model range influence a wargamer's interest in purchasing the models? And for this, we're going to start with John from Wargame Painting.
10. If it sucks in the rules, a wargamer is not going to buy it. It's simple as that. I mean, why would you buy a metal pack of Raptors at whatever $45-50 when they suck? You don't. You just don't buy them. So 10.
All right, Jeremiah Driggs, what's your thoughts? And it doesn't necessarily mean
I'm going to have to agree with John.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to agree with John. It's I think the rule sets definitely and are a large part of why people buy models. That's like with codexes. As codexes come out, they make them bigger and better, and people want that army, so people go out and they buy that army, because of the rules. I think the rules that go along with the models play a large part in why people buy models.
All right. And Smurf, remembering that it's not necessarily how well that particular model fits in a particular rule system, but the overarching rule system itself.
Okay, I gave this a 9, and I want to break this down later in the continued discussion. But my short answer is it's because wargamers want to win, so they'll buy what they need to do that. They don't care what it looks like. They'll convert around it, but it's a 9 because, if it's that good, they don't care what it looks like.
All right. I'm actually going to say that for the wargamer, it's actually closer. It's a little bit farther down the line. I think it's really more closer to an 8. Again, if the model looks cool enough, it really doesn't matter. But the reason that the number is still really high on that end of the scale being an 8 is because, honestly, they're so expensive that picking up a model for a game system you really don't have any intention of ever playing, probably not going to happen. So with that, we're going to go ahead and go to continued discussion.
I
think the bigger...
Okay, hold on. Smurf actually went ahead and called for wanting to expand his thing. So Smurf, go.
I think the bigger problem with this question isn't, what the rule system accompanies it is you shouldn't build the rule system like a codex around a particular model. You shouldn't have to go in and say, hey guys, this model is so awesome, but I have to take it because it's so good, but the model is so ugly. It should be like, I don't like it. I don't have to take it. It's okay. And a good example of this is the flying toasters from Games Workshop. I mean, I don't even know what it's called, but the Grey Knights have it, the Blood Angels have it. It's a flying toaster. And when it first came out, it got so much hate. It got it got more hate than Kanye West thrown at it. And but people bought it because it was too good. They were like, we have to take it in our list, and
what
that's
is that,
not the way.
Talon?
I don't know, and I don't care. But
that flying transport thing, man.
Yeah. It's a flying transport, whatever, and that's not the way the rules should be. Something should never be so good that you have to auto-include it. But that's what I think.
So John, you were definitely up next. Go ahead, throw down your thoughts.
Yeah. Branching off of that, the Dread Knight for Grey Knights, it's a baby stroller, and it's like the ugliest model ever, but it's so OP that there's no reason. And with allies now, I mean, like, cows should take it. I mean, it's that good. But anyway,
look at me, my baby Bjorn.
Yeah, basically. But I think that your statement about the overall rule set is not how people look at models, because you're so into a hobby. Like, I've been playing 40K since I was like 12. So, I mean, I'm not going to just, I could, but I'm not going to just stop. I still have all my stuff. So I'm going to just get the newest edition codex and look at it. And from that, I'm going to branch off, what do I want to buy if I want to buy anything. So it's not that the rule set influences the model. It's going to be the individual faction will determine what models you buy. Because nobody goes ahead and buys random crap for a game system if it's not good in their army. So I think that you got to say, all right, nobody competitive buys random crap.
Well, but again, I think Smurf had it right, and I'm jumping in here. Sorry, Jeremiah, but I'm jumping in here because I guess it's because I'm playing Infinity so much, and where really the models they didn't make a bad model. I mean, the models are good and bad, but they're priced accordingly, so you can take whatever you want to take, kind of thing. So I guess and again, guys, this probably this difference in opinion probably does shape itself based on the various games that we've been playing regularly. Because I think if this was 3 years ago and we were still doing season 1 of the RTD, I think I would be so in line with what John's saying right now. We're like, yeah, who took that stupid model for their particular codex? Or we're in a new rules version, so now definitely don't want to take Carnifexes or whatever, those kind of things. Jeremiah, you want to throw in some extra info right there, or are you ready for next question?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know how much this will add to the conversation, but that's one good thing about I've seen some pretty ugly models with really good rules that go with them, and that's one good thing about this being from a hobbyist point of view. That's one good thing about this hobby is, like, even though it's ugly, there's always that option to let your creative mind create. Models, like do something like Asjar, create this model that counts as this piece, and really come up with something creative and awesome looking to put on the table, instead of just going out and buying said model or taking that model and tweaking it into something that's that much better. So that's one great thing about this hobby is, although you do have this one model that you can purchase that goes with these rules, you're not limited to that being your only option.
All right, so totally agree. I just don't think necessarily people have the time or the talent to necessarily make a better model all the time. Granted, with the flying toaster, that might be a possibility. Let's go ahead and jump on over to question number 3, because it's a really good follow-on question to what we got going on. And question number 3 is, using the same 10-point scale, again, 1 being no influence, 10 being the only deciding factor, which I guess for you guys would mean that the only deciding factor is whether or not it has a rule system, correct? But how much does the model range influence the wargamer's interest in purchasing the game system? So let's flip it around and say, let's say you don't know anything about a particular rule system. All you're seeing are particular models. What is the average wargamer's likelihood of picking up a new or different or their first game system based on what the models look like. And for that, we will start back with Jeremiah Drigg.
Game system or particular army?
Honestly, you could say either, because the real question is, let's say you don't know anything about a particular rule system. All you know is you're looking at this model. What's the likelihood you're going to go into it?
Well, as far as like the whole range, that's one thing that I tell people whenever they ask me what 40K army should I buy. I tell them, which one do you think looks the coolest? So I think that's pretty high. I would give that around a 9, because you have to be attracted to these models to stick with painting a whole army. And you trust me, as you all know, whenever you buy a whole army, you have to like it to want to paint it. So I'd rate that pretty high. I'd give it a 9.
All right, Smurf, what's your thoughts?
I'm going to follow that up with an 8, because I know people who, there's games coming out that aren't even out yet. The rule sets haven't been released, but they're like, I want to play this game, and I've picked my army just because I think it looks neat, and so you have to like what you like Driggs was saying. If I'm going to be spending, an afternoon at the game store for 4 hours looking at my models, I want to like what I see.
All right.
So,
John, what's your thoughts?
I kicked this one around a lot, and I went from a 2 to a 10. I was going to give it a 2 originally, but then I went ahead and I decided, you know what, I'm not going to include the douchebags because that's how they win. So I'm going to say that, the decent players, I'm going to say it's a 10. I've been running 40K nights at my local game store recently, and almost everybody there has a Hordes or War Machine army, and none of them know how to play it. None of them have ever played it. They said that I was at the store, and I saw this kit, and I wanted to buy it, and they've got just bits and pieces from different games like that, because they're just like, these look cool. So the model range, I think, has a huge influence on whether people want to play the game. It's another thing if they actually follow up with it or not.
And again, I am shying on that really, really high number. I definitely am on the positive side, but I think I'm going to still kind of bring it back down just a little bit more and say that it's probably a 7. But it's a huge factor. I mean, quite honestly, like I said, no one went into this hobby game and said, wow, I really like those movement trays. Let's take a look at that game. That just doesn't happen. It's the miniatures. The miniatures sells the game. There's no question about this whatsoever. But when you're buying into a game system, especially when you know how, if you're in a skirmish game, it's a 10. If you're in an army-sized game, I would say the influence is back to about a 7, because again, once you're taking a look at something beyond having to purchase 5 models or a starter kit for something, you kind of get to that point where really knowing more about how the game mechanics work, because again, you don't want to spend all this time assembling, gluing, painting miniatures and never get to a game unless you're a hobbyist. But again, the question is focused on the wargamer. So, continued discussion. It's a little bit tricky because we're all kind of agreeing with one another. I mean, deciding to pick a particular game system is so influenced by what the models look like.
Let me jump in here because I was going to give it a 2 originally.
Oh, yes.
Since that seems to be the highest dispersion there. Back during my competitive days, I've since retired, but back when I was doing Ard Boys and Grand Tourneys and all that stuff, I would regularly meet guys who would go out and buy an army because it was the newest book, build it, and it would come to the table with rubber bands still on the tanks. I mean, like brand new stuff. And they hated these models, but they wanted to win. So I had to think about that, and I'm like, probably 6 out of 10 players at the tournaments were doing that.
But I think you're right. Yeah, and again, this is where that line gets crossed because if you're doing that, you're still already in 40K before you act like a knucklehead and go buy a bunch of models that you think you suck. So you're already knowledgeable about the game system before you go into it. It just might not be knowledgeable about a particular army. And so it's really tough because I'm really interested in those people who don't know anything about the rule system before they're looking at a miniature. Right? So
if I can go back to that, I can attest that the first kit that I wanted to buy when I started 40K was the old metal Oblets from Chaos. And they were horribly ugly.
Yeah, they were.
But
the ones that fit on a 28 millimeter base, like the really small ones, those were heinous looking. Like they were they're one of the ugliest models I think I've ever seen. I was shocked when I was able to. I ended up with 3 that came in something that I bought off of eBay, and I turned around and sold them back as out of production OOP Oblets, and man, they sold for like $20 a piece, and I was like, you guys don't know what you just bought at all. They were ugly.
No, they were ugly as sin, but for whatever reason, when I first got into the hobby, I thought they were the coolest things in sliced bread, and I wanted them. So, I mean, like, there's that scale, too, where it's people
it's so
have
ugly
opinions.
it's good.
Ugly things. It's like the little dogs, the little hairless dogs that people put in their purses, and you're like, why are you carrying around a rat? And they're like, it's my dog, man. It's like, how could you love that? Like, I would drown it in the bathtub if I ever had that in my house.
Okay, PETA, please remember, John, Wargame Painting John's opinion, not of this channel. Please contact him at YouTube Wargame Painting. Thank you. And with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude our part 1 of episode 6 of season 4, The Model. And we'll be back with part 2 shortly.